Before we begin, do me a favor, subscribe, like, and comment now, because once this story pulls you in, you won't come back the same. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. A jogger had found something wedged between the rocks beneath the Crescent Bay overpass, where the city lights fade and the river runs black. Patrol cars sealed the area within minutes, their red and blue reflections shattering across the water. When detectives lifted the tarp, they knew immediately this wasn't random. The victim, a woman in her early 30s, had no identification, no phone, and no visible signs of a struggle, just a single, deliberate mark that made seasoned investigators exchange uneasy looks. By sunrise, the media had a name to chase, *** Jane Doe of Crescent Bay ***. But inside the precinct, Detective Mara Ellison already suspected there was more. The victim's clothes were expensive but outdated, carefully chosen, almost staged. Her shoes were spotless, as if she'd never walked near the river at all. Someone had brought her there. Within hours, the first lead surfaced. A partial fingerprint pulled from a cigarette, but near the scene matched a man who'd vanished from the system 5 years earlier. Evan Rowe, a former financial analyst turned whistleblower, who disappeared just days before testifying in a federal fraud case. Officially, he was presumed dead. Unofficially, no body was ever found. As Ellison dug deeper, another detail surfaced. The victim's DNA hit a private genealogy database. She was ** Lena Rowe ** Evan's younger sister. According to records, she died in a car accident in Germany 3 years earlier. Closed case. Or so everyone thought. Ellison began to wonder who would fake a death, cross borders, and then end up beneath a bridge with a signature mark meant to send a message. When officers searched Lena's last known address, a rented house registered under a shell company, they found nothing out of place. To clean, to quiet. Then a rookie officer noticed a door behind the furnace, locked, reinforced, hidden from the floor plan. And when they finally forced it open, everything the case was supposed to be collapsed in an instant. The hidden room smelled of dust, metal, and old fear. Inside, the walls were lined with corkboards, layered in yellowed newspaper clippings, grainy surveillance photos, and bank transfer printouts. Hand-drawn maps were connected by a web of red string, all converging on a single point. At the center, one name was written over and over in thick black marker, Evan Rowe. This wasn't a memorial. It was an obsession. Detective Ellison stood there, the stale air thick with revelation. He finally understood. The victim, Lena, hadn't been hiding from someone. She had been hunting them. This room told a story no official file ever could. Evan Rowe's whistleblower case, the one that had supposedly been put to rest years ago, hadn't just threatened a single company. It had shaken the foundations of multiple powerful players. The red strings on the board connected shell corporations, offshore accounts, and political donations cleverly disguised as charity work. Lena had been tracking money that moved like smoke, always disappearing just before subpoenas could land. She'd followed the trail across borders, using aliases, living entirely off cash, and trusting almost no one. She was a ghost chasing ghosts. The official narrative had always been that Lena was a tragic victim, caught in the crossfire of a corporate scandal that had claimed her colleague, Evan Rowe. But this room, this meticulously constructed web of evidence, painted a different picture. It was a war room. Lena wasn't a victim, she was a soldier. She had picked up the fight where Evan had left off, determined to expose a rot that went far deeper than anyone imagined. Every photo, every receipt, every scribbled note was a breadcrumb on a trail leading into a labyrinth of corruption. Ellison traced one of the strings with his finger, from a bank in the Caymans to a shell company in Panama, then to a political campaign fund right here at home. Lena hadn't just been connecting the dots, she had been mapping the entire constellation of deceit. Then, just as Ellison felt he was starting to grasp the scale of Lena's investigation, the timeline twisted into a knot. A new piece of evidence surfaced, sent from an anonymous source in Germany. It was security footage from a Berlin subway, dated just 6 weeks earlier. The quality was poor, but the figures were unmistakable. There, walking through the crowded station, was Lena. She was alive, and she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, looking over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed, was a man investigators never thought they would see again. Evan Rowe himself? The silence in the briefing room was absolute. Evan Rowe was supposed to be dead. His case was closed, his file archived. Yet, here he was, on a screen in Berlin, very much alive. If Evan was alive, everything changed. The entire foundation of the case, the accepted truth everyone had worked from, crumbled to dust. It meant Lena wasn't avenging a dead partner, she was protecting a living one. The implications were staggering. Who had they been hiding from? And why would Evan fake his own death? The questions multiplied, each one more unsettling than the last. The investigation wasn't just cold, it had been built on a lie from the very beginning. Within 48 hours of that discovery, the case didn't just change. It took a darker, more dangerous turn. The first sign was the evidence locker. It was breached overnight. The log showed no forced entry. The digital alarms hadn't been triggered. It was a clean, professional job. And only one item was missing from the mountain of evidence collected from Lena's hidden room. The corkboard photo of Evan and Lena together, taken in Berlin. Someone with internal access, someone with a key and a code, had walked in and taken the one piece of evidence that proved Evan was still alive. The message was clear, they were being watched, and the threat wasn't just external. It was inside. Then another blow landed. The jogger, the supposed Good Samaritan who'd found Lena's body and made the initial call, failed to show up for a scheduled follow-up interview. When officers were sent to his apartment for a wellness check, they found it eerily empty. His wallet and keys were gone, but his phone was left behind, still charging on the kitchen counter. It was the scene of someone who had left in a hurry or who hadn't left by choice. And on the bathroom mirror, written in the condensation from a recent hot shower, was a single sentence that chilled the room to the bone. "You're asking the wrong questions." The walls were closing in. The case was unraveling faster than Ellison could stitch it together. His supervisor, a man who usually thrived on high-stakes investigations, was now urging caution, his voice tight with anxiety. He even suggested pulling in federal oversight, effectively taking the case out of Ellison's hands. It felt less like a suggestion and more like a warning. But before any official paperwork could be filed, something else appeared. A plain, sealed envelope was sitting on Ellison's desk when he returned from the field. There was no return address, no stamp, and a forensic scan later confirmed no fingerprints. It was as if it had materialized out of thin air. His heart pounding, Ellison carefully sliced it open. Inside was a small, black flash drive and a single, folded piece of paper. The note was handwritten, the script neat and deliberate. It contained only 8 words. If you want the truth, stop trusting the badge. It was a direct challenge to everything he represented, a confirmation of his deepest fear. The corruption wasn't just a theory anymore. It was staring him in the face. Who could he trust? His partner, his supervisor. The message implied that someone in his own department was compromised, actively working to bury Lena's case and whatever secrets she had uncovered. With trembling hands, Ellison plugged the flash drive into his personal laptop, cutting it off from the police network. He couldn't risk it being tracked or wiped. The drive contained a single video file. The file name was a string of numbers, but the metadata held the important clue, a time stamp from the night Lena died. This was it, the truth, or at least a piece of it. He took a deep breath and pressed play. The video flickered to life. It was a selfie recording, the camera held close to a face in a dimly lit room. It was Lena. She looked tired, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She wasn't speaking to a general audience. She was speaking to one person. She was speaking to him. Lena looked directly into the camera, her gaze so intense it felt like she was in the room with him. And then she spoke, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "If you're seeing this," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "it means they found me, and Evan is already in danger." The video ended abruptly, cutting to black, but her words hung in the air, a final, chilling testament. She knew they were coming for her. She had prepared for it. This flash drive wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was a final message, a desperate plea passed from one investigator to another. Lena had died trying to protect Evan Rowe and expose a truth so dangerous that it had cost her everything. And now that responsibility, that monumental weight, had been passed to Ellison. The note was right. He couldn't trust the badge. He was on his own now, armed with Lena's last words and a conspiracy that seemed to reach into the very heart of the system he had sworn to uphold. The hunt was no longer for a killer. It was for a truth that powerful people wanted to keep buried forever. And Ellison knew with absolute certainty that they would do anything to stop him. The video went black, then stuttered back to life in shaky, fragmented clips. Lena was speaking in hurry, desperate whispers, her voice cracking with fear. Documents and photographs were scattered across a cheap motel bedspread. Her hands trembled as she pointed to the names on the list, names Ellison recognized instantly. Judges, CEOs, a retired senator, these were the people her brother, Evan, had been trying to expose. The powerful elite he thought he could bring down. It turned out they had never stopped hunting him. They had buried the case, completely erased witnesses from existence, and rewritten deaths to look like accidents or natural causes. Lena's supposed accident back in Germany. That was the first lie, the first thread in this tangled web of deceit. Her brutal murder beneath the overpass, that was a warning. A clear, cold message meant for anyone who dared to dig deeper. Ellison didn't sleep that night. The images of Lena, the weight of her last words, the sheer scale of the conspiracy, it was suffocating. By the time the sun came up, her world was already collapsing. Internal Affairs was waiting for her at the precinct. They didn't ask questions, they made demands. The flash drive, Lena's last hope, was confiscated. The case was immediately reassigned. Officially, the murder of Lena Rowe was labeled an unsolved homicide with no further leads. The file was stamped, closed, and buried in an archive. But unofficially, Ellison knew the truth. She was being watched. Every move she made, every call, every conversation, it was all being monitored. She wasn't just a detective anymore. She was a target. 3 days later, the news came. A fisherman pulled a body from the river 2 counties south. The man had no identification, but his fingerprints were a match for Evan Rowe. The media called it closure, a tragic end to a brother's desperate search. The department called it a coincidence, a bizarre but unrelated event. Ellison called it staged. She saw the coroner's preliminary report. Evan's body showed no water in the lungs. He hadn't drowned. He'd been placed there, carefully positioned, just like his sister had been. Another piece moved on the board, another message sent. The funeral was a grim affair. A closed casket with a heavy federal presence that made the air feel thick and static. Uniformed agents stood like statues, their eyes scanning the small crowd of mourners. They weren't there to pay their respects. They were there to ensure the story stayed buried. But amidst the somber faces and quiet grief, Ellison noticed something no one else did. A woman standing across the street, just beyond the cemetery gates. Her sunglasses were too large for her face, her posture unnaturally calm, a stark contrast to the scene. For a fleeting moment, she met Ellison's gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before melting back into the anonymous city crowd. Who was she? An ally? Another player in this deadly game? Ellison didn't have an answer. That night, she returned home to an unsettling silence. Her apartment door was unlocked. Her heart pounded in her chest as she drew her weapon, sweeping each room, expecting the worst. But nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place, except for one thing. On her kitchen table sat a plain manila envelope that hadn't been there when she left. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a candid shot taken just hours earlier. It was of her, Ellison, walking into the precinct that morning. A chill ran down her spine. They could get to her anytime, anywhere. She flipped the photo over. Scrawled on the back were 3 simple words. This isn't over. To this day, the official case files on the Rowe siblings remain sealed under national security classifications. No arrests were ever made, but within the hushed corridors of law enforcement, investigators still whisper about it. They talk about the unexplained bank transfers that funneled millions between offshore accounts, the anonymous tips that would arrive with chilling precision, leading them down dead-end paths, and the series of powerful figures who would suddenly and quietly resign from their positions, citing personal reasons. They say the Rowe case is cold, a forgotten tragedy. But some truths don't just disappear. They don't fade away, they just wait. They lie dormant like a virus, waiting for the right moment to surface. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, you are not ready for what comes next. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because the next case we're opening is even darker. You won't want to miss it.